Hello and welcome to this edition of Africa Today, which will focus on the novel coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic in Africa. We are reviewing measures taken by African countries to combat this deadly virus, which continues to spread rapidly across the world. Thanks for joining me. I'm Mubarak Kenya.
Coronavirus in Africa. The international community is racing to slow down and eventually halt the spread of the coronavirus, a pandemic that has claimed thousands of lives and sickened hundreds of thousands of others. In Africa, the virus spread to most of the countries within weeks. Governments and health authorities across the continent are striving to limit widespread infections. Mid-March, Tedros Adhanom, the Ethiopian Director General of the World Health Organization, said the number of cases in the continent was likely higher and urged African countries to wake up to the increasing threat.
So the best advice for Africa is to prepare for the worst and prepare today. It's actually better, if these numbers are really true, to cut it from the bud. And that's why we're saying we have to do the testing, we have to do the contact tracing, we have to do the isolation, and cut it from the bud.
For more on this issue, we contacted Lawrence Freeman, a political and economic analyst for Africa, who has been involved in the economic development policy of Africa for 30 years. Now, our first question, Mr. Freeman, what's your take on emergency measures taken by African countries to control the spread of the coronavirus?
And some of the African leaders acted very quickly. They carried down a lockdown procedures when they saw the cases emerging in late February. They cut off travel. They implemented closing down of schools for a period of time. They outlawed gatherings of people, including worshiping services. Many of the countries, Ethiopia, the Prime Minister Abiy moved quickly. You had President Kagame of Rwanda move quickly.
Lawrence Freeman, a political and economic affairs analyst for Africa.
Many African countries have rapidly responded to the coronavirus pandemic by providing public information on how to stay safe, including washing hands, having sanitizers in public places, self-isolation, and banks relying on mobile money transfer platforms.
Some countries like Kenya declared a nationwide curfew, while South Africa announced a 3-week-long lockdown curfew to prevent the spread of the virus.
That effective Friday, 27th March 2020, there will be a daily curfew from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning.
African governments are rushing to reinforce measures to contain the spread of coronavirus. Many countries on the continent are worried that their fragile health systems will be swiftly overwhelmed if the disease spreads beyond the current number of cases on the continent.
Now, even before the current coronavirus pandemic, many sub-Saharan African countries had fragile health systems. Can they cope with the current situation?
My concern is that if the spread of the virus COVID-19 were to accelerate, there is a real possibility that the healthcare facilities in Africa would be overrun very quickly. And of course, you also have to realize you have a poor nutritional rate, a high poverty rate, a weakened immune system. Therefore, the African population would be very susceptible to the virus, and they would have a great deal of difficulty in containing it. That's not to say they can't.
Meanwhile, the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the Africa CDC, a coordination body set up by the African Union, has established an anti-coronavirus task force. Its main task is to provide African countries with training on lab diagnosis, surveillance, screening, and safe transportation of suspected cases. The head of Africa CDC says COVID-19 is a looming disaster for the region and must be taken seriously.
We have to win the battle against COVID in Africa because it's going to be devastating in the humanitarian side, in the economic side, and our security side. So this is a serious challenge for the continent.
Can the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Africa CDC, play a crucial role in stopping the spread of COVID-19 in Africa?
This is a very good advance for Africa to have the Africa Center for Disease Control. They, I believe, are working very closely with the World Health Organization, WHO, which is headed up by an Ethiopian. And this coordination is extremely important. And communicating to all the countries in Africa the latest information, monitoring the number of people who have the virus, the number of people who are recovering from the virus, analyzing the data of how the virus is spreading, where it's spreading, the rate of its spreading. These are all very valuable tools because they allow you to have the data that you can make decisions on how to proceed in your country.
Meanwhile, some Africans have accused European countries of exporting the deadly COVID-19 disease to the continent due to the fact that the first cases of infected people in the continent were mainly tourists and other visitors from European countries. A Senegalese newspaper questioned whether France was out to spread coronavirus in its former colony after 2 French nationals received a positive diagnosis. In Kenya also, the first cases of coronavirus were from travelers arriving in the country from Europe and America.
The epicenter of the virus has shifted from China to Europe. In Africa, confirmed cases as of March the 21st were 572, with 12 reported deaths. On Friday, we announced that there were no new coronavirus cases and that the 7 patients who were tested positive for the virus were undergoing treatment and were stable. We continue to monitor their progress as well as the individuals who have come in contact with them. And I may add here that they continue to be stable.
Is it a coincidence that the first cases of coronavirus in Africa were from Europe and the United States and not from China?
This is, of course, very interesting because much of the propaganda from the West was that claiming that China, the Belt and Road or Silk Road of China, was becoming the coronavirus road. And interestingly, you're right, the first cases in many parts of Africa came from Europe. And that partly is due to the fact that the Chinese were very careful and implemented a very strong policy of containment, isolation, and quarantine for their people who were suffering from the coronavirus.
Early February, when the coronavirus outbreak was at its peak in China, a South African company donated masks to China. At that time, there were very few cases reported in Africa.
We would like to take a moment to celebrate the handover of our token and gift of support as a contribution to the challenge of the coronavirus in China and many other countries around the world. China is a key partner to Africa as a whole, and it is only right for us as an African business that we show our support and contribute in their fight against the virus.
Now, South Africa is one of the countries with the highest number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in Africa, and China has also reciprocated the African gesture. Jack Ma, Chinese tech billionaire and the co-founder of the Alibaba online shopping platform, donated via his foundations 20,000 test kits 100,000 masks and 1,000 protective suits to each of the 54 African states.
Millions of face masks and coronavirus detection kits, donated by Chinese billionaire Jack Ma, arrived in Addis Ababa on Sunday. Though the advance of COVID-19 has been slower than in Europe and Asia, the disease now has a foothold in most countries on the continent, and there have been dozens of deaths.
The coronavirus pandemic is projected to impact negatively on the African continent. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development says developing countries will need a $2.5 trillion support package this year to face the economic crisis caused by the coronavirus pandemic.
Sub-Saharan African countries will be among the hardest hit, alongside others including Pakistan and Argentina. Now, Mr. Freeman, how will the coronavirus pandemic impact on African economies?
The way the economy is going to be affected in Africa, and it will be, no question about it, will be different than what we're seeing in the United States, because the economy is much smaller. It's centered around agriculture, small-scale agriculture, and it's also a great portion of it is the informal economy, which is not a good thing, but it's not a centralized economy with large workplaces. On the other hand, the markets in Africa are huge. People crowd into them. It's going to be a real challenge to get people to social distance themselves when the society and the culture brings people together on many different levels. And that's going to be another big challenge for the African leadership.
Well, as they say, every cloud has a silver lining. And that is true for this fishmonger on the shores of Lake Victoria in Kenya, who says the coronavirus pandemic has halted the importation of cheap fish from China and thus boosted the sale of local fish.
With the presence of the coronavirus, those people who are selling China fish have got some disadvantage, because at the moment they are unable to do their business. And I, as the person who is selling the lake fish, now I've got the advantage to sell fish with the price I want.
And now in this segment of our program, my colleague Sheila Nelima will be presenting you with news and events from across Africa. What do you have today, Sheila?
Thank you, Henia. Hello and welcome to this part of the program. It's Sheila Nelima bringing you news and events from across Africa. In developmental matters, Tanzania is in its final stage of embarking on the construction of a state-of-the-art stadium. The stadium will be a 20,000 capacity seater and shall feature volleyball and basketball courts, as well as a 50-meter Olympic status swimming pool. It shall offer training and handle international matches as per the requirements of the Confederation of African Football and the World Soccer governing body, FIFA. More on development, the African Union and the World Health Organization have requested Kenya to host a disease research center that will serve the entire continent. The center will be worth $78 million and will position Kenya as a continental hub for medical research and disease control. The Kenyan government announced the intention to pursue the project. Although construction commencement has been affected by the current COVID-19 pandemic, the government pledged to align budgetary allocations accordingly. In other news, the African Union is undergoing an external audit for the 2012 to 2018 period. The audit was ordered by Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat, the chairperson of the AU Commission, following suspicion of misappropriation of funds by the Finance Directorate. This is the first time the Pan-African organization is undergoing such an audit. Now, while the world grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic, among other methods, African countries have resorted to music in curbing the spread of the virus. Liberian President George Weah and other musicians, including Ugandans Bobi Wine and DRC's Fally Ipupa, among others, turned on songs to sensitize people on the coronavirus outbreak. The songs urge people to maintain social distance and be alert on notable symptoms. Now on to Ivory Coast's Notre Dame de la Paix. It is the world's largest basilica, as tall as St. Peter's in Rome, and now showcases one of the world's largest works of land art. A French artist, Seyper, used the monumental basilica grounds as his canvas, creating images of hands intertwined on the grass surrounding the building. Let's take a peek. This brings us to the end of this part. Follow us in our social media pages and interact with us. Share your views and comments on the program. Do stay tuned. We will be back soon.
South Africa in recession.
The South African economy contracted by 1.4% in the fourth quarter of 2019, following a contraction of 0.8% in the third quarter. South Africans continue to endure frequent blackouts, further hampering economic growth, and the country has been in energy deficit since 2005. South Africa has struggled to emerge from an economic slump since Cyril Ramaphosa became president, promising sweeping changes and reforms.
Fellow South Africans, I believe that our country has entered a period of change. While change can produce uncertainty, while change can also produce anxiety, it also offers us a great opportunity for renewal, for revitalization, and also for progress. Together, we are going to make history in our country.
Despite the promise, Ramaphosa has not succeeded in achieving robust economic growth. Speaking early March, Ramaphosa said that it should come as no surprise that South Africa had once again entered a technical recession.
The signs were there, and that drive us to this lack of growth and this technical recession that we are in now has been there for all of us to see. It's been the load shedding and the impact that it has had on production, both at the manufacturing level as well as with trade. Agriculture slumped down the greatest, and that could also be ascribed to the drought that many parts of our country have been experiencing. But I think more importantly, just business and consumer confidence has been negatively affected as well.
And now to further analyze the economic recession in South Africa, we contacted Dewey Rood, who is the chief economist at the Efficient Group. His career in economic and political analysis spans over 20 years and includes 9 years as an economist at the South African Reserve Bank. Thanks a lot for your time, Mr. Rood. Now, why has the South African economy entered into a second recession in 2 years?
Well, the South African economy was already under pressure during 2019, primarily because of macroeconomic policies, the wrong macroeconomic policies, and things like, for example, the fiscal accounts that were mismanaged. Now, on top of all of this, we get the virus and the lockdown in the South African economy, and I'm afraid the recession will simply be prolonged and it will be much, much deeper. So I'm afraid 2020 will be significantly worse than 2019, and 2019 was already quite a difficult year.
Julius Malema, leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, a far-left Pan-Africanist political party, says the South African economy is going in the wrong direction. Addressing the Black Business Council summit early March, Malema said all the sectors that are supposed to form the core of industrial policies suffered negative growth.
The economy is not growing. Instead, it is going in the opposite direction, and this has been the case for many years now. There are those who are in denial about this reality.
Meanwhile, Sifiso Buthelezi, a National Executive Committee member of the ANC, says economic growth should not be the sole responsibility of the government.
We are worried, and we are all saying that hands on the deck. We are calling on everybody, from the farmers, from the big business, from small business, from DE, to make sure that we all try and get involved in this project that we are involved in to try and jumpstart our economy.
External interference has also been cited as a factor in the current recession in South Africa due to the country's land reforms.
In 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump directed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to investigate the plight of white South African farmers due to what he termed as violence directed against them and the impact on their status if the Constitution is amended to nationalize the land without compensation.
Julius Malema, leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, responded to the remarks by Trump and sent a strong warning to the U.S. to stay away from South Africa's domestic issues.
Because you vote for us, we are going to expropriate land. And Donald Trump will come for us. And Britain will come for us. And the EU will come for us. I said, and I said this throughout my life in the movement, that for everything good comes the pain before.
South Africa is also a member of the BRICS economic bloc, bringing together Brazil, China, Russia, and also India. BRICS is an economic bloc seen as a rival to the G7 economic bloc. Now, how will the recession in South Africa impact on the future of BRICS?
I think South Africa, as by far the smallest member in the BRICS group, is primarily part of the BRICS group, or was invited to be part of the BRICS group, because South Africa is seen as a representative of Africa. Under normal circumstances, South Africa would not have been invited because the South African economy is simply too small. But I do think there's a role to be played for BRICS over time, and I think South Africa's position in Africa certainly makes sense for South Africa to be part of the BRICS group. And I believe once we, through the current difficulties economically, in future, BRICS can play a more important role on the global platform.
The South African Minister of Finance recently announced exceptional tax measures as part of the fiscal package outlined by President Cyril Ramaphosa in his speech on measures to combat COVID-19.
Mr. Rood, how will the COVID-19 pandemic impact on the South African economy, which is already in recession?
Yes, the South African economy was already in a recession before of the coronavirus. And I'm afraid this will prolong the effect on the economic recession in South Africa. I've calculated that it will have and can potentially have a significant negative impact on the South African economy, and a contraction of as much even as 6% for 2020 is certainly possible. At the moment, I expect a contraction between 3 and 5%, but even worse is certainly a possibility.
And on that note, we come to the end of this edition of Africa Today, a continent currently facing the challenge of the coronavirus pandemic. We shall keep you posted as Africa joins the rest of the world in ending this pandemic that is now rapidly spreading across the continent. Thanks for joining me. From me, Mubarak Kenya, and my team, it's goodbye for now.